So we are going live, and everybody, I am here today with Daniel. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. This is another episode of the IndieVerse, episode 14, I think. We took a couple weeks off there because things got a little bit hectic, but we are back now. Oh, and I can hear myself on the other screen. Daniel's just a little bit blurry, but
Stop it. Usually if I turn it on and off, it fixes itself, but it's not. So, oh well.
That's okay. Maybe it'll fix itself as you go through. Oh, that's coming into focus.
So that's in focus. Okay. Oh.
If you go forward, it's kind of in focus.
Like this? Hi. I don't think we want to do the whole show like that.
Oh no, you're back. You're back in focus. Perfect.
That worked. I just had to show it my nose.
All right, everybody, but we are here today with Daniel, and if you don't know me on this episode, I'm Keelan. On the IndieVerse, we talk about all things self-publishing, indie publishing, whether it be the actual writing or audiobooks, whatever it might be. And today we have Daniel on, who is a fantasy and urban fantasy, correct, author?
Yes.
So I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself.
Okay, well, I'm Daniel Potter. In my previous life, I was a microvascular researcher, and I write a comedy urban fantasy series called Freelance Familiars, which is about a guy who gets turned into a mountain lion and then decides he doesn't want to be a witch's familiar, and shenanigans ensue from there. And then I also have Rise of the Horned Serpent, which is sky pirates versus a big honking dragon and his brood. So
sky pirates and dragons, that's all you have to say.
It's sort of like, well, I kind of want to write a Final Fantasy story, and it's got elemental crystals and drama and seducing a bad guy to get into the factory and all sorts of stuff. I don't think people really like it when I call it a kitchen sink fantasy, but that's what it is.
And as you just go through and describe all this, if any of this sounds interesting to anybody here, because I see there are people watching, all of Daniel's links are down in the description box below, so you can get to his website, Twitter, and Facebook from there. So I've got a bunch of questions for Daniel today, and for anybody who has been to the IndieVerse before, you already know, but for those who haven't, if you have any questions for Daniel today, please feel free to leave them in the chat and we will get to them at the end. So yes, plenty of questions because we're talking about humor and science today, which is so interesting because my background's also a science background. So I'm really excited to hear your, I'm just really excited to hear your input. But I mean, before we get into all of that, how did you get started in writing? Was this like a childhood passion, or was this a thing you fell into? How did this happen?
I start this story by basically telling everyone I am a failed mad scientist. So, and once again, this is not working. We'll use the magic squirrel. No. Okay, this camera. Anyway, so I thought I've always been creative. I've never really developed a good outlet for my creativity when I was younger. I just thought I'll go into science and I'll use my creativity, and that will help my research. And that was my thought up until I actually got into a PhD program got an ulcer at the ripe old age of 23
Oh, I'm so
and burned
sorry.
out hardcore.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's so rough.
Yeah. So I changed labs, got a much better boss, and did complete the program. I have my PhD. But at that point, I'm like, I'm just going to have to be a 9. I'm like, I can't put 12-hour days into science. I don't have that constitution, and I'm not single-minded enough. Like, I love science. I really love science. But I like it, but it's not like my second PI who would do fluid dynamic problems in bed as knitting.
I'm having flashbacks. I'm having flashbacks. I'm having flashbacks.
He literally called them this like side research thing, his knitting.
Yeah.
And that's just the sort of guy he was. I love him, but
I think it's super interesting that you say like what was it like single-minded? I forget exactly how exactly you put it. Maybe
I say focused.
Focused. I was going to say focused because I remember I have a master's of science, and I remember somebody coming in to do a PhD presentation, and it was so focused, and the topic was so cool, but I was like, I can't imagine myself studying that for so long. So kudos to you, and you have achieved the dream that I wanted to achieve when I was younger, and I didn't. Also, you get to be called doctor. I'm just going to call you doctor from now on. So
fixed. Yes. Please don't do that.
So how did you get from there to writing?
So process of elimination. So I really wanted to make comics, and so but I have no artistic inclination. Once again, I did do some writing in high school and that sort of stuff, but like very occasionally. So I tried to teach myself how to draw. That lasted maybe a year. And then I tried various things where I was writing comic scripts and then forcing my spouse to illustrate them. And that's a good road to divorce, let me tell you. And I ran my own, I kept at that. I hired an artist who lived in Indonesia to illustrate a sort of gothic fantasy webcomic called Walking the Lethe. And I ran that for 2 years. And that was a learning experience. It never really caught on, but it was a learning experience. And then the postdoc I was doing ended, and I was 5 months looking for a job. So that couldn't afford the artist anymore. So then I moved to San Francisco for a job. And during that, after tooling around for a couple years and taking up welding as a hobby, but decided, I really want to make this novel thing work. And so I just started plowing all my free time into noveling. And that's where we went. I had seen the indie revolution sort of happen. That was around 2013 or so when I really said, okay, we're going to do this noveling thing.
That is such a cool story. And I think it's so interesting to talk to folks who've had different journeys to writing novels because, I feel like the typical story that we hear is, ever since I was a child, I really wanted to be an author. And while that's true in many cases, I've had the opportunity to talk to many folks like yourself who have developed into writing, if that makes sense. So that's really, really cool. And now, so you write fantasy humor, which I find super interesting because I also write fantasy, but I don't think I have a funny bone in my body. So I like fantasy can easily become like so serious and dark and epic, and it just feels like there's all this like pressure. So I was wondering, like, I guess my first question is why include humor? Like, why is that something that you wanted to do? Why did you want to write fantasy humor?
I'm not that serious of a person.
Mm.
I mean, I always came from, my favorite books growing up were fantasy that had a lot of like threads of humor. We're talking Terry Pratchett, Piers Anthony, although I wouldn't reread his books now. They've got some really interesting themes that fly right over the head of a 13-year-old.
I have not read them. Terry Pratchett I have read. I have not read the others. So
Terry Pratchett, golden. Read them all you want. Piers Anthony, you step back, you reread like some plot summaries, and you're like, oh.
All right, good to know.
I read a lot as a kid, and read above my age level, certainly. And you look back and you're like, yeah, I read those books, but I didn't understand those books.
That's so true. Oh, I can't tell you the number of fantasy books that I've read as a kid, and then I've gone back and read them as an adult, and I'm like, what? I did not comprehend this as a child. I was just like, wow, dragons, magic, and cool, fun stuff that's happening.
Right.
Also,
and then the other stuff, you're just like, oh well, we'll just push that
to the side. I don't know what.
I don't remember
we'll just move on. Yeah, yeah. No, but that totally makes sense. I feel like that makes sense. If humor is like, I guess you're not a super serious person, so you want to write something that's not as serious. I guess, like, I'm curious again, because fantasy can become so like of epic proportions. Like, how do you go about incorporating humor into fantasy? Is it through the situations for the most part, or is it through like dialogue between characters, or is it just everything?
Partial, like, Rise of the Horned Serpent isn't really a comedy the way that Freelance Familiars is. I think in urban fantasy, you really got a bit more room for humor, just because you have the modern day, and you just can't help using your characters to poke at that. You know what I mean? You just can't. And the concept of the Freelance Familiars, I don't think really lends itself to a grimdark or anything. I mean, it was the first off leash was really like.
Oh, I think we're a little bit frozen. All right. Daniel did let me know before the interview that sometimes the internet's a little. Oh, there. I think you're back. No, still a little bit frozen, but frozen on a funnier face. Yeah, so Daniel did let me know at the beginning of the interview that this might happen and that it should be back up within like 30 seconds or so. So don't go anywhere, everybody. But I'm going to take this moment to pause and let everybody know who's watching now, because I do see there are people watching now. If you have a question for Daniel, please let us know in the comments. Again, we are talking about humor and science in fiction today. So please drop all your questions. Okay. There you go. You're back.
Okay, you're back. Okay.
I took a moment to do a quick little interlude. So no, you were talking about the concept, how the concept was humorous.
Right. So Freelance Familiars was basically I was writing a more serious sci-fi novel and not and getting stuck on it. And then NaNoWriMo came around. And I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna try NaNoWriMo and write this story about a guy who gets turned into a mountain lion. And we're gonna go from there. And I just wrote the story, and it's a bizarre concept to begin with, and I can't resist tossing in even more bizarre characters on top of that. And so I had a talking squirrel, and he was originally a throwaway character, and then his role grew and grew and grew, and now he's like a co-star in the novels because he likes to blow things up.
That's so great. It's funny how is that him?
Yes. Well,
that's so cute.
We've attached some fireworks.
It's so funny how little tiny side characters can end up becoming that in a story.
I really can't resist doing that, such as in the Rise, I have a spider who's my spouse actually made back there, who's basically a giant jumping spider, and he's about as smart as a German Shepherd, and that's Blinky.
That is awesome. Yeah, sometimes there's just characters that need that larger space. So I'm curious as to know, like, who is the audience for kind of more fantasy humor type stories? Is it the same audience as fantasy, or are you kind of like targeting and looking at a different, I don't know, age demographic, or is there a certain, like, are there certain people like out there looking for fantasy humor, or do you just kind of market generally towards fantasy?
I market more generally. It's a smaller slice of the audience who are going to go pick up a book with a cougar and a squirrel on the cover, and it's not a kid's story.
But your covers, I mean, your covers are beautiful. Like, they're stunning.
Oh, they're very nice, but they're definitely like definitely a little different from what you see next to them in the Amazon store quite often.
Mm-hmm.
And so marketing the series has been a bit of a trial sometimes. I have a loyal core audience, and it does fairly well, but finding new people can be a little bit of a trick through paid advertising. I've only really had success on Facebook, and Amazon AMS hasn't worked since since the cost per click went over 20 cents.
I do hear often from folks that either, like, because I have not tried my hand at AMS. I've had very small successes with Facebook that have not scaled. So that's something that I have to learn. But I have heard from folks frequently that, like, either Facebook works for them or Amazon works for them. And I guess it's just who is browsing those sites. I'm not sure. But I have heard very frequently that it's either kind of like one or the other. Some people it works both, and lucky them. But I guess I want to switch gears for a moment and talk a little bit about the science side of things, because I mean, I just find it fascinating that you have your PhD, and I'm sure I could ask you questions about that for hours. And you did speak a little bit about your science background. So I was wondering, like, how does that background, like, how do you think it helps you in writing fantasy? Does it help you? Do you find it does help you?
Well, it definitely leaks into the fantasy novels. Like, I keep on, in all my magic systems, the magic is usually some sort of multi-dimensional manipulation, and it's always got to tie into some sort of pseudoscience sort of thing, and I try and explain it way too much, and some of my readers really like that, and some of them skipped out those parts. But it comes out, and in Freelance Familiars, the main character is a cougar. So I have done a lot of research into the different species, how they perceive the world, and that sort of stuff. And some things I take, and some things I ignore, like the fact the color vision of most cats isn't quite so good. That's just
Mm-hmm.
step uh, step to model. I feel other than a few throwaway mentions, but I really do invest in the behaviors of the animals and that sort of thing, and try and incorporate those. But I mean, my science of microvasculature, I did a lot of research on traumatic brain injuries and hemorrhagic shock. So I guess I have a better perspective on just how bad it is when you lose a lot of
Mm-hmm.
blood and hit yourself in the head. I try not to concuss my characters too often.
You get a concussion. You get a concussion. Everyone gets concussion.
I don't cold clock characters very often.
Yeah. Oh, I find that interesting. So I have a question for you, because as somebody who um, has studied science to a certain level, I find it very difficult for me to stray from, in a fantasy or a sci-fi world, anything that's like, I'm a very hard magic system writer. I like when there's rules, and like you, most of my stuff is based on some sort of science or pseudoscience. So I was curious, do you think it would be hard for you to stray from that? Do you think it would be hard for you to write something like very whimsical that had no basis in like a pseudoscience or something like that? Or have you done it before?
I mean, the magic system in Freelance Familiars is pretty soft.
Okay.
I, they have abilities and that sort of stuff, but generally, if something is neat, the saying in Freelance Familiars, with enough time, knowledge, and tasks, which is kind of the magical currency which powers magic, you can do anything. It's just trying to invest the time, the knowledge, and the task, and getting that all in one part. And so magic users tend to be very specialized, and the primary Thomas's primary partner is a fire magus, and so she's very good at lighting things on fire and fighting, but has trouble with teleporting and other sort of things that are outside of her discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And then Thomas is a smart guy, and so sometimes the plot demands he learn something on his own. So, but it goes in phases and that sort of stuff. Sometimes I wish I had a more defined magic system, but at the same time, it's useful and very interesting when I can just like, oh, they have this really neat ability, and we can build that in.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, so it sounds like you're kind of doing a little bit of a balance. There's like the science background mixed in, but there's also some elements that are kind of the more softer side, or the more like made up realm. So that's really interesting. And I guess that kind of leads me into my next question. So like a lot of folks, I mean, there's a lot of folks out there who are writers who have formal writing education backgrounds, and there are a lot of folks out there who do not. So I was wondering, like, in your opinion, what are some advantages to having a background, whether it be in career or academia or wherever it might be, in a realm that is not writing related? Like, are there any advantages you see to that?
I mean, advantages. I mean, every writer just has their own unique experience, and how that balances out is just kind of like a mishmash of of personality and that sort of stuff. I couldn't really tell, somebody could probably read my writing and say, oh, because of his experience, he writes like this. But I just kind of write what I do. I mean, and that's probably one of the things about not having a formal education in like English or that sort of stuff. I'm much more kind of instinctual when it comes to my writing. It's just I write what kind of feels right, and my grammar is totally horrible.
Same.
And I you ask me what a noun is, and I'm like, that's the thing that is the thing, right?
That's the thing. That's the thing. I think that's the most accurate description.
Yeah. And, I rely a lot on my editors and beta readers to sort of like clean up my manuscript. I'm also ADD and generally lack any sort of attention to detail. And so, yeah, I am not one of these writers who could write a book and then hand it to someone and it be completely clean. No, my editor does a lot of work just making sure my sentences are coherent. At the same time, I'm just, my language is very immediate and it doesn't bog down that much.
So on that note, just because I'm curious, this wasn't one of the questions that I prepared beforehand, but I am curious. I love to hear this from all different authors. Like, what is your, I suppose, writing/editing process? Are you a pantser, a plotter? How many rounds of editing do you typically do? Is it a pretty clean draft coming out of drafting or not so much? Anyway, I just like high-level summary of your process. I'm always interested to hear.
I'm a pantser mostly. Like, I'll start with like, and I have a whiteboard over here, and so I'll brainstorm a bunch of ideas, particular plot points, and then as soon as I start writing, it kind of goes all out the window.
And I hear that.
And I just get like, I've tried to do outlines, and they don't last. I'm very character focused. I'm in the character's head. And if I get to the point where my outline is just like, character wouldn't do that, would they? No, they wouldn't do that. Or more likely is like, I have ideas that would be so much better than the thing I thought of in my outline. Like, I just, if I'm just like listing bullet points and scenes, it's just very predictable stuff. And until I'm in the characters' heads, I don't really get a good story out of it.
Right.
And so, I have to, generally, I just write, and hopefully I've gotten better at finishing a first draft. But this last book, I had some health problems in addition, and so that killed my momentum at certain points. And you get to this point where you don't like what you're writing, and you're like, it's like slogging through mud. And then I just step back and I go, okay, what's wrong? What has to change? And then we toss out 50,000 words and we rewrite.
I've been there.
Some it's, you salvage chapters and that sort of stuff. But this last, I tossed it out at, I think, 20K and then at 70K. And I finally got this last one up, I finished it and it was 95K. And I'm like, whew. That was a long book.
Yeah. I also find, I I kind of go through that love-hate relationship process with my book too, and sometimes it's like a total rewrite. And then sometimes I also go back to read. I take a little bit of a pause, even if it's just for like a day. I'm like, okay, I'm hating this right now. I need to take a pause. And I go back and I start reading it. And I'm like, you know what? This isn't that bad. I don't know why I was like hating on it so much.
Usually, like, I'm addicted to new characters. I like, ooh, I've got a good idea for this really fun crocodile character. And so this latest novel is just, it was just too stuffed with new characters. And I had this last edit, I had to go out, okay, you're doing this, but there are a bunch of characters, new characters that just weren't getting developed. They were there, but they weren't really doing anything. And so I had to go back. I didn't really change much of the novel, but I basically grabbed some old characters, threw out the new characters, and shoved those old characters into their roles. Yeah. And that worked a lot better.
So I have a question, because you've mentioned characters a lot and how characters take you to kind of different places. And again, this is something that I'm always curious to know from folks. When you have the first like conceptualization of an idea, lots of folks, sometimes it comes in a whole picture, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes people have an idea for a character first, and sometimes people have the idea for the plot first or the world first. I'm wondering, like, if you think back to how the ideas come to you, does it come in the form of a character, or does it come in the form of the plot, the world, or does it just all happen at once?
Oh, it's totally the characters for me.
Yay.
Now that this book is almost done, I'm editing. I've got to edit this. My brain is like really excited for, I want to do a new series, and I have this character who's an EMT in an urban world as magic comes back, and I've got her character, and I've got nothing else.
That's such a cool idea. I love it.
I have her personality. I have her kind of backstory. I have her partner, who is a trans woman, and that's the only thing set in stone so far. And I know I'm gonna. They are my next project. And we will figure everything else out as we go along.
That sounds like a super interesting project. And it's interesting because I'm not the kind of person where the character comes first. So it's interesting that to me, when people say the character comes first and like the backstory and the relationships and all that, I'm like, really? No way. That's so interesting. Anyway, it just like, it like really blows my mind, because I can't even like picture in my head what that would be like. So it's just so interesting learning about different people's processes. So I have about 3 questions left. So I do just want to remind everyone watching, because there's a bunch of people watching right now. If you do have questions for Daniel, please let us know in the chat, and we will get to them at the end. So one of the things I'm curious about, because obviously you're using your science background in your writing to a certain extent, and then also integrating humor. Are there any points at which, and I mean, I'm not sure, I'm just curious, like, are there any points at which you see those two intersect in your writing? Or is there, I don't know, I was just curious, like, is there anywhere they're overlapping, or is like humor the whole novel overlapping? Pardon? Yeah, humor and science.
Science? I mean, I would probably, humor is going to come out in anything I write. I just, I'm really in love with the whole snarky characters, and I really love characters who interact with each other in sort of that friend family dynamic where they can joke with each other and that sort of stuff. A lot of the humor is in the dialogue, and they're in Off Leash. It's just they deal with deadly serious issues and that sort of stuff. It's a buddy fantasy between a squirrel and a cougar, and he swears in nut-based metaphors. So
Love it.
You
So
just
good.
roll with the situation. And you have characters which can appreciate their own situations, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess again, like it's so interesting hearing you like come back to the characters, and characters are for sure my weakest spot of writing. So it's really like making me think about how, you know, so much comes back to the character, right? So like I definitely am going to be going back and taking a look at my current draft and being like, okay, well, how does this character influence the world? So that's really, really interesting. I guess I'm going to ask this as kind of like a two-part question. So just, you know, for those who are watching right now who might have an interest in science and including science in their writing, what resources would you recommend to them? Are there any resources that you use? And if not, like I guess the broader version of that question is are there any writing resources that you would recommend to folks? A lot of my audience, just for context, is new to writing or just publishing their first book, like myself. I'm in that bucket. So I was curious, like, is there anything that you're like, this, you have to, not you have to have this, but like, I have to have this to write a book? For some people, it's like Scrivener, and for other people, it's certain craft novels. So I was just curious, is there anything that you would recommend?
There's no magic bullet when it comes to writing. There is absolutely no one thing that I could say, this is the thing that will make you everything easier. Writing is hard. Writing will
This is true.
always be hard, especially if you're not someone who is basically like, I love writing. It's my escape. I would do it even if you poke my eyes out and cut off my fingers, I would find a way. For me, writing is work. Writing has always been work. And I really need and want to create stories and characters. For me, writing is the medium that has worked for me. But it is, whenever I sit down, it's like, it's still a job. It's still work. I can enjoy parts of it, but putting words on the page is not easy for me, at least. And I love what I do, but it's hard. And I just want to speak to everyone who have that experience and say, it's okay if you find it difficult.
That's a great point.
It's okay. That doesn't, if you know, writing on the page does that if joy is not flowing from your fingers, that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong.
I love that. I think one of the things that we see, or that I've seen a lot in kind of the writing space, is like almost a bit of a toxic positivity mindset where everything has to be absolutely wonderful all the time, and you have to be 100% like into writing all the time. But I like the way you frame it. Like, writing is a job. If you want to make it your job, writing is a job. So I think that's a really, really great point. And there's some really great takeaways there. So I guess my last question for you, and I see some questions in the chat popping up. So if you do have questions, everybody, please let us know. But if you could go back to the moment before you published your first book, what advice would you give to yourself, and why?
You know, that's a really hard question, because I'm still trying to figure it out. There's still, you know, I'm full-time now. My books are in the black, but I'm not. But that's thanks to the grace of my spouse mostly, and savings and that sort of stuff in the day job.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't made it. So I don't know if there was like one thing I could do differently that would have brought more success, or is responsible for the success I've had. I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of us are.
There's, my writing is better. And, a lot of people say Off Leash, the first book I wrote, is like their favorite because the first in the Freelance Familiars. And I'm like, I'm a lot better than that now, but you got to get into this series somehow. And I'm I just finished the 5th book in that series. I wrote 3 and then took 2 years off to write Horned Serpent, and now I'm back to that. I don't know if looking back, there's no one thing, because not only is that, but the one thing has changed. I've only been doing this for maybe 6 years, but still the landscape is different. I guess I should have gotten into Facebook ads right off the bat or something. But I can stand here and say you should have wrote faster. But, full time, I'm struggling sometimes to do 2,000 words a day. So yeah. I'm never going to be, and then I have to write 3 drafts before it's something somebody wants to read. So I'm never going to be a book a month person.
Mm-hmm.
Next year I'm going to try and go a little faster.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. Like, there's a lot of pressure to do different things, but everybody's finding their own path. I'm going to hop into some of these comments and questions here. I just have to call out this comment here because Craig was saying, I have a hard time playing Mad Libs with the family. They have to explain to me what verbs and nouns are all the time, every time they ask for a word. They ask why I don't know these things since I'm an author, and the answer is I'm an editor. And this just goes back to our conversation earlier on. And I internally laughed when I read that. I'm like, that's so true for me as well.
I don't even, Scrabble. I can't, any of that sort of Scrabble or Boggle. I can't spell for beans. That's why I have a word processor.
Yep. Thank goodness for spell check. So Bonnie has a couple questions here, and Bonnie is asking, is there a point in your process where the character takes you over and begins to write themselves practically? Or do the characters all take on a life of their own or not?
The characters have distinct voices in my head. But I don't know. There's not I don't usually have conversations with them or anything. They just sort of they come out in the process of writing them. I don't, I will often voice their lines audibly and weird out my spouse as I start speaking in squirrelies.
I also do that. I voice their lines out loud. Yeah.
But it's at least this last book. It was I hopped directly from 4 into 5, and so that didn't give them a lot of time to sort of build up in my head and start oh, it'd be really cool if we did this. What if we did this? What if I got a robot?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I that's interesting. So do you, I follow-up question. Do you generally take time to like percolate between your books? Because you said I jumped like directly from 4 till 5. Is there generally like a period where you let the ideas percolate before jumping into the next one? Or is it just kind of based on the schedule that you have going?
I mean, it's I usually, when I did science as a day job, there were usually long periods after I got a book where I'd just be going, oh, I'm dead. I'm dead now. And, my ambition when I quit the job was I'm going to release 4 books this year. And I published the first one, and then I got I got dizzy, and that slowed down the second one significantly. And I'm going to be lucky to get a third one written before the end of the year. But I'm hoping, since it's new and shiny project, I'll be energized once I finish the whole editing and releasing process. It looks like that book, Pridefall, should be out in November, I think.
That's so exciting. Oh, so exciting. Also, more books than most people don't write one book, so that's amazing.
Right. Well, this will be my 9th.
9th? Yeah, number 9. I was trying to remember how many I put on the cover, on the thumbnail for this video.
We don't talk about that pen name.
Okay, 10, but we don't talk about that pen name. Got it. All right, so there's a few more comments here. If anybody has questions, please do let us know. This was just, I think, to the writing resources, so Story Planner and Scrivener. They're helpful.
I do use Scrivener.
Oh, you okay? And how did you find it hard to get on Scrivener? I heard there's a bit of a learning curve. I don't use it.
I mean, generally, I only use its outlining stuff once I get stuck. Otherwise, it's just a word processor.
Right,
but
with the ability to like move
the whole
stuff
reason I really use Scrivener is it has a much better autosave than Word.
Yep. Okay.
It never loses any of my work.
Totally fair.
When I close the window or restart the machine, I'm ADD, so I frequently forget to press that S. And when I was just using Word, I would lose a lot of work. And but I've been using Scrivener I wrote comics in it, so it's been nearly a decade.
That's awesome. I need to get onto Scrivener, that's for sure. I'm very looking forward to trying it eventually.
I actually because it's Mac only, so I've got my PC and my very old Mac laptop on the same desk, and I have like a few switchers for switching in between. Just
to be able to use Scrivener?
Yep. Let me tell you, like switching between the control and the Apple button and the Windows button is the bane of my existence.
So I also understand that struggle because I have a wireless keyboard that is attached to both my Mac and my PC, which is my work computer, which typically wouldn't be at my house but I'm working remotely now because of, the pandemic. And so I use this to switch between the two because I can switch between them by just clicking a key.
Right.
But oh my gosh, the command control, all of that.
It's like, let's copy paste. Open up the. No, I didn't want to open the start menu. Or you do it the opposite way, and that's like some sort of like page down or something. And it's
gosh, it's a nightmare. And I do it every single time. Every single time I switch, I'm using the wrong commands. We just have a couple more comments, but no more questions. And this is just going back to writing. And Craig, congratulations on your releases in November. But that is absolutely amazing. So I think, we're at 50 minutes. If anybody does have any additional questions, please let us know down in the comments section once this video goes live, if you're not watching it live. But Daniel, I really wanted to thank you for being here and spending an hour with us today. And I know you've got a bunch of exciting stuff coming up, release in November, everything. All of Daniel's links are down in the description box below, so everybody make sure to go check it out. And Daniel, I will turn it over to you. Promote whatever it is you want to promote, and then we'll sign off.
All right. Well, you can find me at danielpotterauthor.com. I'm Fallen Kitten Pro on Twitter, and Fallen Kitten Productions on Facebook. Right now, I'm heavily promoting Freelance Familiars. So that's a 4-book series. You can get the first 3 books in their box set for $9.99, and it's all in KU. So the 4th book. So I will just show you the cover to entice you all. You'll notice that's a squirrel piloting a giant robot. This good. Is the sort of shenanigans that's an actual scene in the book that you want to read about.
That's amazing.
In the book, I have the scene I'm most proud of is it rains lions.
So good. That's
African lions.
so interesting, and I'm sure there's like so many amazingly creative things in there that people want to dive into, especially raining lions and squirrels driving robots. But thank you so much again for joining us today, and really appreciate it. Yeah, no problem. And this will be live, so everybody, this will be live. This will be, well, continue to be live. I'm not really sure how to describe it. It will still be available for people to watch online after the fact. So if anybody here who is watching enjoyed this episode, please let your friends know. The IndieVerse does all things self-publishing, all things indie publishing, and all the episodes will be here. So thanks so much for watching, everybody. Thank you again to you, Daniel, and we will talk again soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.